Every description of God that I've heard holds God to be all-powerful, very typical, and all good. And I see earthquakes and tornadoes and disease, childhood leukemia, and I see all of this and I say, I do not see evidence of both of those being true simultaneously. If there is a God, the God is either not all-powerful or not all good.
Touch anything. Say, look.
On the way.
Kicking off episode 28 of An Atheist, a Believer, and a Pastor Walk into a Bar. Right off the top, I do want to apologise profusely for those of you who have been waiting to what is now just the most amazing podcast ever. We have multiple technical difficulties tonight, which we are trying to work through. But that was Neil deGrasse Tyson succinctly letting us know what his beliefs are. Now, there are some of us tonight who will agree with him and others that will not, such is the nature of us humans. Belief is very personal. Now, by that, I don't mean necessarily a belief in God. I mean beliefs in all sorts of things. The people on this podcast are here deliberately because we are, well, some of us are atheists, some of us are Christians. I'm not a believer in God. Simply because I'm not convinced of the lack of any evidence. And by that I mean the kind of evidence that would be irrefutable and would convince me that God is real. I'm not sure what that would even look like. That's something we've talked about in the past, but I reckon I'd know when I saw it. I'm still looking for proof that there is in fact a God. Still looking. G'day and welcome. I'm your host, Peter Rowe, presenting this live podcast on YouTube. Great to have your company on this 10th day of July 2024, just gone 8 o'clock, Australian Western Standard Time, broadcasting from Perth, Western Australia. At the moment, you're watching on YouTube, hopefully soon back to Facebook as well, but we have to have 100 followers in order to do that. So please, if you can jump onto Facebook, follow us. Although I tried again today to find a follow button on our Facebook page, and I'm blowed if I can find it. We'll have to check it out. Last Wednesday, we kicked off a series of special guests to find out what they believe. John Lewis, formerly of 6PR, was our very first guest, and we had a hoot. I hope you enjoyed it if you tuned in. If you didn't, you can find that episode, which is episode 27, plus all of the other podcasts before that. All you have to do is go to the address that I might get Rich to put this up on our comments, which is youtube.com/@ Atheist Believer Pastor /streams. And if any of you got that written down, you are amazing. I'll give it to Rich a bit later. We can put it up there. So let me introduce our team for tonight. Firstly, it would normally be a couple of men with very strong learnings toward being believers, and Rich and Luke. Luke's not with us tonight, but welcome to you, Rich.
G'day, Peter. Good to be here.
Yeah, also tonight, Jason Suresh, also not with us tonight, which is unfortunate because he's really looking forward to talking to our very special guests tonight. But welcome, Jace.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, mate. G'day, gents. To our very special guests, a man I consider a doyen of radio broadcasting. Yes, recently added author to his list of amazing achievements over a very long and illustrious career. A man who I've had the pleasure to work with on Radio 6PR a long time ago, and he showed me the art of connecting with his audience and getting them to call and to have a yarn. If you're listening from somewhere other than Australia, you might not know what that word yarn is. It's having a chat. Have to be careful because we are international on this podcast, and a lot of people out there going, what the hell are they saying? This gentleman I'm talking about is a deep thinker and has mastered the art of turning those thoughts into a language that captivates anyone lucky enough to hear him articulate his beautiful words of wisdom and insight. That description can only fit one person I know, and that is our dear friend, Mr. Bob Maumill. Welcome to you, Bob.
Nice to be with you and in such an illustrious company.
Indeed. It's a nice thing to say, mate. Firstly, congratulations again on your amazing book, Letters from a Hard Country. If your heart is in any way connected with Australia, Western Australia, Kalgoorlie, you'll love this book. How are the sales going with it, Bob?
Well, I self-published and I'm marketing it myself with the help of some friends. I've sold about 1,100 copies,
Wow.
1,100. We cracked the 1,000 mark a couple of weeks ago, and since then I've had some people bring me and have asked for the book. You can buy it online at bobsbooks.com.au.
Bobsbooks.com.au. Love it.
bobsbooks.com.au, yeah. Or you can buy it at Planet Books over in Beaufort Street, Northbridge.
What's involved in getting it
But
into...
anyway, we're here to talk about the big questions that plague us all, not about my modest little tome.
The one you held up in front of the camera before, you mean?
Oh, yeah, well, that was just a test pattern.
Yeah, look, we are going to talk about...
It was the first thing I could lay my hands on.
That's fair enough. Because, you've been a broadcaster, an award-winning broadcaster for a very, very long time. But I dare say in that time that you've been on air, you may not have ever talked about your innermost personal beliefs and what that might look like, what that might sound like, what you might view is something extraordinary or perhaps something that a lot of people also think about. So are you in any way, shape or form a kind of a spiritual man, Bob?
Not really. I'm not a believer, but I'm a sort of a quasi-Christian, and I'll tell you why. I think Jesus was an important historical figure. I believe that Jesus may one day have woken up after a dream or a vision, as people did in those pre-biblical days. They were very much influenced by things like dreams and visions, trying to explain the unexplainable or inexplicable. And I think that he went on a pathway of spreading a doctrine of love and connection to fellow human beings. I believe Jesus, the historical figure, was a man with a very kind heart, a message of love and embracing other people and other beliefs and other races. I think he was a good man with a great idea that took on because there was a lot of brutality in the world at that time, and people were looking and needing something different in their lives, other than the authoritarian heel of the Roman invaders and others. But I don't believe that he was the Son of God. I don't believe in God. I, like most people in the world, including the great scientists, I can't explain how it all began, but I'll go back to where I started and say I believe in Christianity and the Christian message, but I don't believe Jesus, the great prophet, was the Son of God.
Like, based upon that, and this is kind of an obvious question on the back of that, what do you think happens to us when we die, Bob?
I think we turn to dust like anything else. I think I'm in the last years of my life. I don't believe my spirit will endure and go to some place over a rainbow bridge. I believe that I'll turn to dust and I'll become just another organism that was born, lived its. I nearly said orgasm, but I suppose that was part of it all. I'm just another organism that was born, lived its life, withered, died, and turned to dust, and as all things do. I think in a very short period of time, I'll be forgotten, as most people are. Maybe my book will remind, it's in all sorts of libraries around the place, that may linger on and remind people that there was the bloke who actually lived in Western Australia called Bob Maumill, and he wrote a book, but that's about all. I don't expect my spirit to be out there in the cosmos floating around in some place called heaven. Turn it up.
Would you? Is there any part of you that would like that to be real? Did if you found out that in fact you do go on to live, and I'm with you, Bob. I'm in your camp. I don't believe that either. But I'm open to any irrefutable evidence, as I mentioned in my opening, that would refute my belief and show me that there could be such a thing as a heaven.
I think all people are open to proof. It would be probably the greatest day in human existence if God revealed himself and said, well, him or herself or whatever it is, and say, well, here I am, I did it all. Now you non-believers line up and have a long, hard look. This is what I've done. This is what I'm capable of. This is what awaits you if you maintain the faith. I'd love that to happen. I'd jump on board, but it ain't going to happen. And I'll get back to where I started and say that Jesus Christ, the man, for whatever reason, brought a great message to us that if we embraced it, most of the world's problems would disappear. Unfortunately, blasphemers and people with their own agendas cherry-pick part of the Christian message and have turned it to their own, often evil ends. I mean, I've seen Christian iconography as a background to Hitler and some of the, for instance, General Franco, the brute of Spain. I've seen him standing with men of the cloth in front of Christian iconography and saying that he's a Christian. Jesus Christ would walk up and hit him with a stone if he saw someone like Franco using the Christian message for political purposes. And in its purest form, it is a wonderful message that could have saved humanity had we not distorted it. We, when I say the human race, not distorted it, often for selfish and the most obscene reasons.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to hear any arguments from any of us, Bob. I think we're all like-minded when it comes to that. I mean, I have no doubt. Historically, of course, it's very easy to prove the existence of Jesus and what he said and what he stood for, and absolutely. I mean, I think the message is clear, and it is a great message. But unfortunately, like everything else, it's been bastardized over a very long period of time, and it seems the longer we go on as a race, the worse it gets and the more abuse it cops through all of the kind of avenues that you've been talking about. Bob, Lou has just jumped on. I know you're a big fan. Lou worked with you. She said, love Bob Maumill, had the privilege of working with him on radio. Hands down, the best talkback radio presenter Perth, Western Australia has ever seen. Follows it up with an I agree, Bob. Once we're done, we're done. And my brother, who's in Albany at the moment, Bob, Greg Rowe, if once we are done, we are done. What is the purpose of us being here?
Well, there is no purpose. I mean, we are just another organism that has developed in a certain way, and we have, from the time that we could think intelligently, the human race has been trying to find ways to frustrate the natural order of things. In other words, we've been trying to frustrate the natural process of birth, life, and death by living longer, resisting the disease and obsolescence that's built into our bodies that kill us off to make way for the next generation. We've been trying to frustrate all that. We've been looking for eternal life. And when science has been unable to deliver it yet, then we look to the spiritual. I've been reading extensively about Christian beliefs during the Dark Ages and the period of Oliver Cromwell's time as Lord Chancellor of England, and religion played an incredible part in people's lives. There were witch hunts and burnings, and people were killed at the stake because their neighbours ratted on them and said, "Oh, I heard the woman last night. She was engaging in a pagan chant," and she'd be dragged out and then tied to a stake and burned as a witch, all in the name of religion at the time, because there were things that they saw and experienced that to them were unexplainable. They didn't have the scientific knowledge, and so they said, well, there must be some great spirit that's guiding all this, and they feared that spirit. That was totally opposed to Jesus' message. Jesus' message was one of love and embracing each other and embracing your spirituality and being nurtured by it. Whereas when the officials of the church, the established churches, got hold of the Christian message, they used it as a tool to suppress people, keep them under control, suppress their ordinary feelings of sexuality and the other things that go with life's pleasures. They used Christianity and the message of Jesus as a weapon against the poor, uneducated, illiterate masses, keeping in mind education was restricted to a few, and used Christianity and these poor souls' belief in God as a weapon to suppress them. It's happening again now in the United States. The Christian nationalists have warped the message of Jesus Christ. They call themselves Christians, and they are using it to oppress the American populace.
Yes. Yeah. Well said, Bob. Greg has jumped in again saying maybe we already have eternal life. Where were we before we were born? Well, that's, I would imagine, an impossible question to answer. But you go on, Bob.
Well, I mean, the human body, like the body of any animal, has developed in a way that allows them to continue to propagate the species. Our bodies produce the necessary bodily fluids and bits and pieces that when a man and a woman join together at a certain time of the month, then a child, it can result in pregnancy and the birth of a child. Now, that's not restricted to human beings. As the old song says, birds do it, bees do it, and all sorts of people and chimpanzees do it. It's not unique to the human race. We seem to think we're special, but if you stand off and take a long, hard look, we're just another species that has developed in a certain way. We have, from generation to generation, expanded our knowledge and broadened our intelligence, and that's what separates us from other species that whose brains haven't developed as extensively as ours has, and has allowed us to become the apex predator. And with that intelligence and with that expansion of the mind has come this need and desire to impose the thoughts and will of ourselves on others. I don't say our group and you and me, but you know who I mean. The Donald Trumps of the world, for instance, and Hitler and Franco and Stalin and Putin, they have used this expansion of the mind and the intelligence that came with it to dominate their particular surroundings, dominate, if you like, their countrymen and women, and use that intelligence and power as a weapon of war or as a means of oppression. And that's where the wiring in our brains have gone horribly wrong. What other species wages war on their neighbours and rips and tears them to pieces? What other species thinks they have a right to exist above all others? What other species will capture a subspecies, breed from it, treat it as a pet, and then kill it and eat it? I mean, we have deviated, so we have used our intelligence to become monsters. And I think in the end, if there is an Armageddon, we will be at a point where we've killed everything else off, and then we, as we have already started to do, start systematically killing each other.
It's a bleak picture, true, Bob, but I find it so sad, and you articulated it beautiful, just how we have, I guess, created this place that seems to be, developing at a rate worse and worse. And what's happening in America now? I mean, Donald Trump, if he becomes president, his poison is going to reach all corners of the globe, and I'm scared about what's going to happen, because there doesn't seem to be any logical conclusion to stopping the inevitable, and that's really sad, really, really sad. Rich, as the only Christian among us tonight, sorry you're outnumbered. Have you got a question for Bob you'd like to ask him, or a point of view?
Well, first of all, as we always find out in our discussions, we end up agreeing far more than we disagree. So, yeah, I find myself nodding my head furiously at almost everything you're saying. One of the things I look around, it's easy to see where we are now. Growing up, I grew up in Western Australia for most of my life, but I know, Bob, you grew up in the early years in Fremantle. In those early years, was church and religion a feature of your growing up in Western Australia?
There was a time when my family fell on very hard times, and for our very existence at one really dreadful period, we had to turn to the Salvation Army for help. Pardon me. And when I went to school, we had a period once a week called Scripture, when an Anglican priest would come in and try and instill in our minds some understanding of God and the Christian message in relation to the Anglican Church's teachings. But having said that, at a very early age, I embraced Jesus as an historical figure, but rejected the premise that he was the son of a great spirit, an all-being spirit that created everything in his image, in his or her image, and that Jesus was his son born of a virgin. I think that's just a cop-out by probably the churches over generations, embarrassed by the fact that people revelled in a good sexual experience from time to time. And do you know a Russian general, when I once travelled on the Siberian Railway during the Soviet years, when the Soviet Union was all-encompassing of Eastern Europe, I happened to meet a retired Russian general, and he shared with me a glass of Bulgarian brandy, and it loosened him up a bit. The Russians are great drinkers. And he said, if you can control the spiritual beliefs and feed your message through the spiritual beliefs of the population, he called it the proletariat, if you can instill in their Christian beliefs your political message, then you have them in your grasp until they die. I wrote that down in an exercise book after my conversation with him, along with other notes, and it's resonated with me. And I'm watching it happen now in America. I'm watching the Christian nationalists do that very thing. They are cherry picking parts of the teachings of Jesus that they can turn to their own ends, and ignoring the more benign and caring aspects of Christianity.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I always wonder. I ask that question because I always wonder, in one sense, what went wrong with the United States. Because it's not like we were completely devoid of religion in our sort of culture, but somehow we took a different turn here in Australia, where I'm hoping that we can keep that kind of Christian nationalism out. And one of the things, again, I love reading about this, and one of the emerging research out of the United States in this, the sociology of religion is they've actually a growing movement that are actually defining Christian nationalism as a new religion, as a serious break from historical Christianity, the message of Jesus, into something that's, they may call it Christian, but all of the features is actually a discontinuous break with it. So it's quite interesting. About what you're saying about the core of the message of what Jesus said, and what those kinds of groups have is almost like they're reading some other documents, or who knows. So I really appreciate that.
Well, it's classic neo-fascism. Hitler, as I said before, he embraced the church in Germany, and they reached an accommodation. I saw the Vatican during World War II. Yeah. The Vatican were far too compliant. And of course, General Franco had a cozy relationship with the Catholic Church in Spain. The same could be said about General Pinochet in South America. I can see the rise of Christian nationalism. With the Christian nationalism is the new face of fascism, and I can see it on the rise around the world. And one of the first things these modern or rising neo-fascist movements do is to overtly display their religious trappings, their religiosity. They say, I'm a Christian, I can't possibly impress you. And yet that's what they're doing and what they're going to do. Getting back to a question that I was asked early on, if I may, Peter, I was most impressed as a young man about the work that was done in our community by various volunteer church groups at a time when there were very few shelters for women who were beaten and belted at home by drunken husbands and by children and families who'd fallen on hard times. There were Christian groups who filled the gap where the presence of government was needed but wasn't there. There were Christian groups that filled that gap. And as a young bloke, as a paper boy on the streets of Fremantle, I saw it. I saw women who were volunteers in Christian churches, the Salvation Army and others, moving through the front bars of the roughest pubs in Fremantle, untouched and respected, and spreading a message and at the same time rattling a tin to raise some money. But it impressed me at the time that within the Christian churches, at that level, at the volunteer level, there are wonderful people trying to carry out the basic teachings of Jesus. Whereas the further you go up the chain, you get further away from the purity of Christ's message.
Yeah.
Jace, you worked with Bob back in the day at 6PR, and you've seen him strut his stuff on air, and no doubt, like most of us, have really enjoyed his ability. I remember, just before I get to you, I remember when I was paneling once for Bob. For those people who don't know, in a studio, by and large, talkback announcers don't operate the desk by themselves. They have a Bob Maumill off to the side and have people like me back in the day operating a desk. And it was very quiet with no calls coming in the 6PR. So what Bob did was he picked up a blank piece of paper, and I didn't know this. He's looking at this piece of paper, and I had a call from Ingrid in Bayswater. He's not very happy with it. She goes, Bob, why don't you shut the hell up about blah, 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 blah. And I'm looking going, there's nothing on that piece of paper.
You're revealing the magic, Pete. Stop it.
Yeah, and well, he's not in radio anymore. Otherwise, I wouldn't. And the phone's lit up, and he looked at me and gave me a wink, and I went, okay, Bob, I just saw what you did. That was beautiful.
Genius.
I hope I haven't given away a magician's ability to make something disappear, Bob. But did you ever experience anything like that working with Bob, Jace?
Look, I was very fortunate to have some time working with Bob at 6PR, and one of the things that I enjoyed most about working with Bob is that he was, I would argue, pretty much the black sheep at 6PR. His politics were quite different to most of the other people at 6PR, and that's good. We didn't really talk about politics at all, but it was good for me because I kind of aligned with Bob's position on most things. So I felt a great deal of empathy and sympathy, with what Bob was often arguing. Bob, one of the things that I wanted to put to you is one of the arguments I very often hear from Christians, and that's around morals and ethics. Now, for me, your politics are very much a reflection of your morals and ethics. Now, for you, I would argue that you're either a centrist or a left-leaning centrist, perhaps even a little further along the spectrum, although, it's not just a single dimension. There's lots of elements to it. I get that. But if you don't follow the Bible, if you don't have Christianity at your core with its teachings, how do you develop your own morals and ethics? And as they very often have said to me, why aren't you out there raping and killing?
I mean, I think, well, I probably, and I don't say this flippantly, it's because, like most people, I have a core of goodness. Now, there are evil people. I've met evil people. I've interviewed evil people who were born without conscience, that gene that tells us what's right and wrong, that gene that instills in us a sense of mercy and pity. It's missing in the makeup of some people. And I've met them in my time. Thankfully, not many of them. Yeah. And I think you can be a very, very good person and be an atheist. I think you can be a very, very good person and not be a Christian. I think to be a Christian, a dinkum Christian, not a paper mache Christian with your clothes cut to suit your political beliefs, but I'm talking about a devotee of Christ, the historical figure, and a person who embraces his message. I think you can be those things and still be an atheist. You don't have to be, and I'll use a colloquial term, a Bible basher, to be a good person. In fact, often the opposite is the case. But I will say this. When I was writing my book, I encountered a man I thought I'd hate. His name was Charles Owen Lever Riley. He was Anglican Bishop of Perth and later Archbishop. He was also Grand Master of the Lodge of Freemasonry and at one time was senior cleric to the Western Australian Armed Forces. I thought, I'm not going to like this bloke at all. And his background and all of the titles that he had and the company he ran with, who were the major political figures of the day, represented everything I disliked. Yet he came to a bridge in his life that if he crossed it, he would fall out with the people who were the prime movers of politics and business in WA. He took a trip to the northwest of Western Australia, and what he saw shocked him. He returned with a sense of horror. He said the indenturing process that allowed landowners and a favoured few to indenture Aboriginal people was simply another word for slavery. He said it is an offence and an affront to God and the teachings of the Anglican Church. Now, in doing that, he immediately fell out with all of the most powerful political figures of the day. Yet he did it. When the challenge arose, rather than consider the high office that he held and the impact of his remark, by the way, he wrote a lengthy letter to the governor, which was published in the press of the day and caused uproar when he made all of the accusations I've just laid out. He fell out with the Premier, Sir John Forrest, and he took him on. He didn't take a backward step. Now, I set out with a preconceived idea of how Charles Owen Lever Riley, the Anglican Bishop of Perth, would react when the challenge of what he saw confronted him and how he would deal with it. and he dealt with it, pardon me, the way in which Christ would. He tried to use his position to effect change. So it's easy to say that people who take their vows and become men or women of the cloth and devote their lives to the church, that they accept the dogma, they stick to the religious dogma, and in doing so lose part of their humanity. Well, I can say that's not the case, and Charles Owen Lever Riley proved it to me.
That sounds like that's a rarity in your time, Bob.
Well,
like
this occurred in the early 1900s in Western Australia, in colonial times, and of course, one of the wonderful things about our country is the way in which we are fairly laissez-faire about religion. You know, if the bloke next door wants to get on his knees in the front yard every day and offer prayers to the Almighty, yeah, why not? I'll talk to him about footy when that's over. I mean,
well, except he's a Muslim.
We're very understanding, and the way in which we allow people to pursue not only their religious beliefs, but their political beliefs. I'm extremely proud of the way in which we have, to the best of our ability, maintained the separation of powers and separated church from state.
Yeah.
In the United States, it's going the other way. But here in Australia, when we select judges to the High Court, or when a bishop is ordained and when a religious festival is held, we often join in other people's religious festivals. We don't care how judges of the High Court are appointed. They are not appointed on their political beliefs. They're appointed on their understanding of the law and the respect in which they're held by their peers. Whereas look at the United States. At every level, politics and money has polluted their political system, and dare I say it, their religious institutions as well. But we in Australia, it's wonderful, and I will be massively disappointed if we suddenly start insisting on, as they're doing in America, have the 10 Commandments pinned up in the classroom, how judges and public officials are appointed not on their ability or understanding of their particular job, but on who they support politically. I will be disappointed and horrified if we go down that
well,
track.
We are seeing a little bit of it, though, aren't we, Bob? On the conservative side of politics.
What I will ask you, Peter, is are any of your guests in favour of the church becoming more involved in politics?
No, not at all. Not that I'm aware of at all, Bob. And that's a great question, because we do have people from all walks of life, from local to people in California and other places around the world. And it hasn't been a direct question that we have asked our viewers, but I would hazard a guess to say that no one has ever verbalized it becoming more or less, just fairly neutral. One of the things I want to talk about, Bob, which I found fascinating, I grew up being told, don't talk about religion and politics. And I never understood why. We always went against the grain. I thought they're two of the greatest things we can ever talk about. Where do you reckon that came from in your time? Was that something that flowed in from places like America? Because it's it doesn't fit with the Australian way of life, according to the story that you just told about how we get on with our neighbours and how we tolerate one another.
Yes, we do. I mean, I think it's within our national psyche to be fair-minded. Giving the next bloke a fair go, whether that be man or woman, giving him a fair go is something that has been part of the Australian national psyche. We believe in that. Now, we haven't always done it with our fellow Australians, particularly Indigenous Australians. We haven't given them much of a fair go. But I will say this, that I enjoy a discussion on religion and politics, but you can never change anyone's mind. Once they are welded onto a political idea or party or doctrine, I don't know, you can't prize them free. Now they'll change their vote. They'll change their vote over a single issue like COVID or you know, the boats and illegal immigration. They'll change their vote over things like that, but their core political belief, whether it be of the left or right or centre, they rarely deviate from that. So you can have a discussion about it, and you can have a discussion about religion, as we are having now, but when it's all over, nobody said, well, you convinced me, I'm now going to vote for the Conservatives or Labor or Greens. They don't do that. People, and they're most often influenced by their background. You know, most farmers I know, either they are extremely conservative, they vote for the National Party or conservative so-called liberal candidates. They never ever vote Labor, and they are horrified at the thought of ever voting for the Greens. So most people, and that's because they're influenced by their background. And the same with me. I grew up in a union household. My father was a waterside worker. I was brought up in a belief in the union ethic. United we stand, divided we fall. The ship owners and the stevedoring companies are oppress the workers. You know, I was brought up in that climate. I witnessed the great strikes of World War II and after World War II. I heard Paddy Troy and the communists talking on street corners in Fremantle. I saw Bob Menzies in Forest Place.
Wow.
You know, and my political beliefs were set then in my formative years. And I think that's the case with most people. But that doesn't mean surely that we can't talk about it in a civilized way.
One of the things that I've noticed, a real surprise to me, Bob, talking about religion and changing people's minds. When I started this podcast, it was with myself and Rich, and Rich is my nephew-in-law, and we had another Christian guy, Luke, who's a lovely guy, and there was me, and then Jason came along, and so it's like two atheists versus two Christians, as it were. But what we've actually found is instead of diametrically opposing what the other people are saying, we've actually grown together. And as Rich said at the beginning of this talk tonight, we've actually found that we have so much more in common that we don't. And no, we haven't changed each other's minds, and we're not necessarily desiring to do that. But the ability to understand and accept and actually embrace the differences and realize that there are so many things that we agree on. I mean, and Richard and Luke are not your normal stereotypical Christian people. They are far more liberal, they're far more freer, I guess, about that. So we can talk about religion. We may not change each other's minds, but we've influenced each other backwards and forwards so many times over the last, I don't know, 6 months, 28 episodes. So it's really encouraging. I never thought that would happen, to be honest.
No, well, and I find it invigorating. I got into a terrible blue on air one day with a Christian missionary. He was a lovely man, and he started to talk to him about the Bible and Christ, and I said, well, he didn't read or write. And I said, Christian scholars have tried to, and I believe he was illiterate, as most people were. I believe Jesus was illiterate. That's why there was nothing written down. And he said, oh, well, that's because God made him a great oral communicator. He didn't need to write anything down. And I said, well, wasn't the Bible, which he was waving at me at the time, I said, wasn't the Bible written or put together some 40 or 50 years after his death? And human nature being what it is, the men who contributed to the Bible and interpreted or printed their teachings, their view of the teachings of Jesus, wouldn't they, as human nature would incline them to do, put their own thoughts and reasons and interpretations on the word of Jesus? And therefore, we don't really know what he thought about certain issues. We're acting on hearsay. Well, he threw his Bible at me in the studios of 6PR. He pelted me with his Bible. He called me a blasphemer, and I thought they were legitimate observations of someone with an interest in Christianity, but not a traditional believer.
Brilliant.
Oh, and of course, it was back in the day when there wasn't a cam recording all of the stuff that actually happened in the studio. So no one got to see it. That's just that. Did he apologise, by the way, Bob, later on when he realised?
No, he didn't. And I was very new at the job. I'd only been in it a few weeks, and I didn't know there were parameters you worked within. I wasn't sufficiently astute at what I was doing to know that there were certain boundaries and not to wave a red rag at a bull, and that someone who were inflexible in their views on Christianities and religion, you didn't taunt them or question their inflexibility. If you did so, they'd erupt, and he erupted, all right, and whether it be politics or anything else.
I'm sure your ratings went up just after that, Bob. Now, you inferred earlier that, and Greg's responded to it, talking about his retort is, "We are not monsters," in relation to what you were saying. It's a sensible statement on its own, isolated. We are not monsters. That may be true, but certainly the behaviour of too many people would indicate the opposite to that. We might not be monsters, but we are capable of behaviour that is likened to that of a monster. Would you agree?
Yes, I think, and I'll talk about the human race as one entity. I think the human race is monstrous. I think we were given a wonderful blank landscape on which to develop and planet Earth, and almost from the day we crept out of the cage, we've been trying to destroy it. My green beliefs are starting to come to the surface now, but I think the teachings of Christ has tried to tell us that what we have is a jewel to be cherished, and we've spent 2024 years. We've spent that and more trying to tarnish the jewel that we were given, and I think we'll ultimately destroy it. We're like monsters who are burning our own home or destroying it. If you like a carrion bird destroying its own nest, that's what the human race has become. I think Jesus would be horrified. I think if he saw what we've done and what we have become, he would be horrified. If he was the Son of God, he would say, Father, wipe the slate clean and let's start again. Because we've made marvellous advances in science and weaponry and technology. Yet I think every time we do that, we sacrifice a little bit of our humanity. And we've got to a point now that we're nothing more than units of consumption. We're hooked on the extraordinary belief that we can continue to indulge in growth economics that relies on continual expansion and a voracious appetite for natural resources and the habitat and food of other species. We've become so arrogant that we are monsters, and we are sowing the seeds of our own doom. Not in my lifetime, and probably not in the lifetime of my children or their children's children. But I think we are seeing at the beginning of the end. Our voracious appetite for things that we are not entitled to, the food of other species, the habitat of other species, our necessity to fuel our economy by creating more and more units of consumption, in other words, human beings, to absorb the material things that keep the economy turning over. I think our need to do that in the end, they will bring about Armageddon. I think that I think that's why the billionaires of the world are seeing what's happening. They've twigged and they're starting to look to other planets as a haven.
Yeah. I think that's probably the what's really driving the interstellar freaks that just we got to go out, we got to get we've got to find another planet that we can inhabit, and Mars looks like it's it. Bob, you're in your 80s. You've had an amazing career. Does that, listening to you paint the picture of what you've witnessed throughout your life, does it break your heart to think that there doesn't seem to be any way of stopping the direction in which mankind is heading? Do you just see us as an evolving species who has pretty much lost control and can't see how it can possibly stop?
I think that's a terrific question. No, it won't stop. We will eventually empty the sea of fish. We've already started to pollute the wonderful environment we were given to live in. We are stripping the skin off the earth, and we have dominated and forced to extinction so many other species that eventually will start doing it to each other. In fact, we've already started doing it, and we witness that on our TV screens every night. I think it's irreversible. Although I will say this, there is a man that's written a book about the doctrine of degrowth. His preposition is this: we should think of another economic model rather than the one we all live by, and that is, if you're not growing, somehow you're failing as a government and a society. He's saying pause for a moment, reflect, and work out how we can limit growth and still have the things that we aspire to improve our standard of living. But any politician that's got up and said that in public, well, the business community would tear him to bits.
It's the end of your career right there. Rich and Jace, the floor is yours. Take away.
You know, I'm actually
I'm giving Rich enough rope.
Yeah, look. No, I really value people who've seen life for a while, because you can have an idea for a little while, and it's only over time that you can see evidence whether this thing's actually working or not. So in your youth, you have a lot of idealized views of the world. And one of the things I really loved about what Bob was saying to us is about, the fair go of Australia, the egalitarian nature that we have. I do see a lot around the world going on. I wonder if there's something that Australia can do to like double down on that sort of fair go ethic to change something, because it's really hard for one of us to do it. But I wonder if a whole nation could sort of do something. Is there any way that we can really encourage what some of the best of Australia, its outlook on life and its outlook on each other to somehow turn things around? Or
I love that. It's a great question.
Seen anything like that work?
No.
I think, well, there was a period in my life in the 1960s when I thought I saw humanity at its best. Violence became there was a message of love and embracing the human spirit and embracing each other that was abroad in the land. It was led by the so-called hippie movement, but many, many people, including some who went on to be great leaders, they embraced the message of the 60s, which was opposition to war and violence, opposition to the Vietnam War, opposition to killing off fellow human beings, opposition to greed, opposition to corporate thievery, tax avoidance, and of course, the monster of corporate greed that was forcing people into poverty around the world, the destruction of the natural environment. All of those things became worthy ideals. They weren't spoken of in hushed tones. Here was this movement, people with flowers in their hair, walking around hanging daffodils around the necks of policemen and women, and espousing the value of love and protection of the environment and each other. Of course, that was the last thing that the military industrial companies wanted to hear. The weapons makers, the fascists, the oppressors, They didn't want to hear this message, but for the time that it was embraced around the world, I think was the best time of my life.
Yeah.
I look back on it and I think you could go anywhere in the world and link up with like-minded people who didn't want to hurt anyone, who did not want to hurt anything, who were asking the big questions about life and human existence. These days, people just aren't doing that. And the questions that are asked are, how are we going to continue growth? How are we going to continue to take the stock market to record levels? How are we going to continue to boost immigration to breed more units of consumption, people, babies? That's where the discussion these days hovers around. The things that we talked about and thought were important in the 60s have been suppressed, and I'm sad to say, vilified by many people who now hold high political office.
Yeah,
we need a new hippie movement. Come on.
I'm old enough to remember the hippie movement. And my brother Greg, who's joined in with the conversations tonight, I mean, Greg missed out on being off to Vietnam when they had the you had to fit the pull out all the numbers and dates for people who are going to head off to war. He missed out by the skin of his teeth. At that point, he had the big peace sign around his neck, and he was a real hippie, and it was a great time. I remember it, Bob, the 60s, which flowed for us into the 70s, and we had a hippie commune down between Albany and Denmark with peace and love and all of that kind of stuff. Back in the days where Easy Rider was a great film because it was all about getting stoned and being on a Harley and riding around the world. And I hear you, Bob, and I would love to know at what point that ground to an almost an abrupt halt. And I would imagine it would be some political ideologist who just thought this is not good for our economy. We don't want people living on communes bumming off everyone. Let's get them back in. And it just disappeared. It hung around a fair bit into the early 70s, but then it was all over Red Rover, and we've never seen it since, and we will never see it again, I don't think.
Well, you may be right. I hope you're not. But I thought when the Green movement first was born in Europe, and I saw some Greens elected to the German parliament, I was going to have a crack at pronouncing their parliament in German, but I'll let that go through the keeper. Let's just say the German parliament. I thought, well, this could be the start of something wonderful.
Yes.
But it faltered. Political commentators started to vilify it and criticize it and make fun of it, the Green movement. Called them tree huggers and hippies and backward-looking anti-business, all of the political labels they hung around the necks of the people who had those views, and it sort of never developed further than just a rump on the body, a tiny pimple on the rump of the body politic, which is very sad because I'd see the Labor Party in Australia not as an alternative government with progressive ideas, but a party both at state and federal level that has moved from centre left to centre right, that they have occupied a position formerly held by the so-called small L liberals. So I don't see a political movement that can sufficiently capture the imagination of the public to change the path that we're on.
I think Bob Brown probably came the closest to that, and still is active in Tasmania. He at least pumped a bit of life and reaction, and has done so for a long time. And it is still alive.
Yes, he is.
I'm wrong, and I hope you're right.
Let me ask you: is Bob a Christian?
He is.
He is. I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah, there was a recent documentary.
In one way, that's a good thing, but I'd like to think that Bob's not.
Same.
Simply for this reason. I mean, one part of me said, gosh, I hope he's a believer in the teachings of Christ. He's not. If he's an atheist and a non-believer, it would reinforce my view that you don't have to be a practicing a religious devotee or Christian or whatever to be a good person. I think Bob Brown is a good person who had the right thoughts and ideas, I think his God is the natural world, and he put his reputation, money and time on the line to try and save it. The more good people I meet who don't have a religious commitment of any kind, reinforces my belief that in most people, enough people, there's a core of goodness that may change the tide of history, but I doubt it.
John Jace?
Bob, for the longest time, Bob, the media really has had control of public messaging. And whether it was left media or right media, it always had some semblance of responsibility. Now, as you would be well aware, every village has their idiot. Social media came along, and that has suddenly given every idiot around the world a soapbox to stand on. And all of these idiots are now finding each other, and there's no responsibility. No one is managing this. No one is controlling the ridiculous amount of misinformation and disinformation that's being put out there. And I just wonder if you think that social media has a case to answer.
I think it's got a massive case to answer. In fact, I think that the media barons and the owners and shareholders in social media are contributing to my monster belief. I think they feed the monster within the human race. They feed our dark side. They've given our dark side a voice. And in the case of people like Donald Trump and others and his fellow travellers, the social media and the media barons have not only given them a voice, but has also given them respectability. They've given a platform to spread their poison. It's a very worrying trend. But you mentioned that every village has an idiot, and every idiot now has a computer and access to the information highway. And of course, these idiots link up with each other, form a movement, come up with some outrageous doctrine of belief, that outrageous list of beliefs, and fellow travellers join them. Well, then you start having school shootings and defence of the gun laws and open carrying of weapons in supermarkets. And that's how the madness begins. That's how it takes one idiot and the madness begins. And we're seeing we saw one of them become the president.
Yeah. Bob, can I just jump in and ask you to put your phone back a little bit on the holder? It seems to have gone right forward.
I knocked it over. Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. It's just the sound was distorting a little bit. That's better. That's better. Just as we get toward the end, Bob, just want to remind all of our viewers out there who are watching us live on YouTube at the moment to perhaps jump in if you've got any comments, remarks, anything at all you'd like to talk to Bob about. We know we're going all around the world. There are people, of course, in other parts of Australia whom, believe it or not, have never heard of Mr. Robert Maumill, which is an absolute crying shame. This is a great opportunity to, if you've got a question, jump on the YouTube. You'll see the little window there. Chuck in a question or two or a comment, and we'll wrap it up in around about 10 or 15 minutes. But if you'd like to do that, that'd be awesome. Love to hear from you. Just some of the questions I had written down that I wanted to ask you, Bob, and we do a quick fire question thing, which I don't know. We might have a go at that. We'll see how we go. But we have our saying when we talk about the 10 Commandments. We have our own saying on this particular podcast, Bob. Our commandment is simple, and it's one: don't be a dick. Do you subscribe to that? No doubt.
Could you repeat that, because you were distorted?
I was going to say, can you hear me clearly now? Is that okay?
Yep.
Instead of the 10 Commandments, which we find kind of, unnecessary, you really only need one commandment, which we subscribe to. Well, I think all of us do, which is don't be a dick. Do you agree?
Oh, yeah. Well, but that can embrace many sins, can't it?
Yes.
I hear people say, I don't want to vote because it's my right not to vote. They're being a dick. I hear people say, we've got to cut down trees because we've got to build houses. What do you want to do, live in a tent? And I said, well, aren't we sufficiently smart to be able to plant as many as we cut down? And they say, what are you, some tree-hugging greenie? They're dicks. I see people who vilify Aboriginal people on Facebook. They're dicks. Yeah, I totally agree with you. If we're going to have a slogan to live by that we can attach to this podcast, let's make it as you have. Don't be a dick.
There is another word which is often substituted for that word dick, but we won't use that particular word.
It's a very Australian way of putting it, isn't it?
well, look, it is. I mean, the 10 Commandments should not be held up in 2024 and presented as the best set of rules for a human being to live by. For whatever reason, for whatever purpose, for whatever need, it was created for a time. It isn't that time. It doesn't contain any of the things that we do in 2024, which should be outlawed and should not be a part of any kind of commandment. We just simplified in Australia. We love shortening everything, and that's just a simple thing. Don't be a dick. And if you don't be a dick, that means you are going to be lovely and caring and loving and a really nice person.
Well, it doesn't have the same cachet, but be nice, I guess, is the nice version of it.
Absolutely, be nice.
If I can paraphrase a line from the movie Saving Private Ryan,
yes.
Tom Hanks said to Matt Damon with his dying breath, he said, be a good man.
Yes.
And I think we can apply that, or we can say be a good person. I think don't be a dick is an extension of, we can extend it to don't be a dick, be a good person. I think if we embraced, if we all embrace the goodness that I hope is in us all, and that is in Christ's message, and I think that most of the world's problems would not appear as insurmountable as they are at the moment. Don't be a dick, be a good person.
Yeah.
And I think I think if we could all take that on board as a primary commandment, the others would follow.
Yes. Well, I think we're very lucky, in particularly in Australia, of course, because we can have a whole bunch of beautiful friends. Really come across those people who are considered to be dicks, who are cruel and nasty and psychopathic and all of those horrible things. We have the ability to choose and the freedom to be living in a country which has the vast majority of people who are loving and kind and generous and embellish our lives beautifully.
Well, well, when as you can see by my face and hear by my voice impediment and the patch over my eye, I faced the challenge of cancer, and at age 80, and it required extensive surgery. I had to have my face rebuilt. My facial nerve was removed, and that left me with a speech impediment, but I'm here because I survived.
Yeah.
It's when you go through challenges like that, and when you limp around the supermarket, barely able to drag one foot after the other, and your walking stick slips and you fall over and knock the baked beans counter over, and people rush from all directions to lift you up, get you on your feet, make sure you're okay, offer to drive you home. And you look at their faces, some of the faces tattooed with all sorts of strange symbols, others the faces of elderly people and young children, and you look into their faces and see the concern of their eyes for an old man with obvious problems, health problems, who's crashed to the floor and is in need of help, and they're offering it. You think, well, maybe there is some hope for us.
But is that a small group, Bob? I mean, can we rely on this group to take us forward? I mean, we're all part of it, but I just fear there's too many evil people out there now.
Well, let's just say the fight back has begun.
Come on.
Look,
the anti-dick movement and the worshippers of the goodness in people. Hopefully that movement will catch on. But well, God, we've got an extraordinary mountain to climb.
Yeah, look, I think there's well and truly enough people out there. We see it all the time. We are both the beautiful people and an often heartless people. Bob, just going to wrap it up, just to have a little bit of fun, if you don't mind, for a couple of minutes. I've got a quick fire bunch of questions, which we ask our special guests.
Yep.
Oh, Bob's changed position. Is that you've made him? Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, you're number one now, mate. You're the big face, and we've just been diminished.
Go ahead, Peter.
It's a beautiful thing. All right, number one question: is the Earth round or flat?
The Earth is round, and it spins on an axis that creates a gravitational pull. Otherwise, we'd all float off into the cosmos.
Well, now you're just showing off. Moon landing, was it real or fake?
Oh, gee, that's a good question. I think it was real.
I'm excited.
I think it was real, but smart, and people a lot smarter than me say it was all staged in a large warehouse in the desert, and so that the Americans could be seen to be regaining space exploration ascendancy. I'd be great if it was all staged, but no, I think it was real, because I looked into the eyes of an astronaut I interviewed on Sydney radio one time, and he had this faraway look, and he said, don't believe he didn't walk on the moon. He went into space and went orbited around the moon a couple of times and came back. And he said, once you've had that experience, it affects you forever. When you look beyond the moon out into the cosmos and galaxy after galaxy after galaxy, he said something happens to your mind. And when I looked and watching the astronaut who did walk on the moon, Neil Armstrong, when he did walk on the moon, when you see him on television, and they did a close-up, he's got that same faraway look of a man who's been through a unique and life-changing, mind-altering experience.
Yeah.
No, so I reckon it was real.
For a government who wasn't very good and still isn't very good at keeping secrets, it's hard to imagine they could possibly have got away with that. Now, I know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway to be controversial. Donald Trump or Joe Biden?
Donald Trump would what?
Just who's your preference, Donald Trump or Joe Biden?
Well, Joe Biden is essentially a good person. He's got 40 years of public service. When he was subpoenaed to appear before a congressional committee and he turned up, he has willingly shown his tax records. He's a public service and his life is an open book. Donald Trump has conned people in business. At one stage, he paid his tradesmen another 20 cents in the dollar when he had the wherewithal to pay the full amount, but he treated it as a sport to rob them of what was due to them. He is a philanderer, an adulterer, a bankrupt, a liar, and a cheat. And he's judged by a very low standard, whereas poor old Joe, after 40 years of public service, he's been judged on one bad television appearance. I think it's dreadful, and I'd much rather have Joe Biden. I think he's a safe pair of hands, although he's got a lot to answer for over his support for Netanyahu. And feeding and allowing the American weapons manufacturing industry to feed their product into Israel and the war on Gaza. That aside, I think he's a far safer pair of hands than Donald Trump because he's essentially a good man.
Yep. And the fact that he's a good mate with Barack Obama, I think he's got to carry some sort of weight. Tamara has just written in to Tamara, a regular on our podcast, Bob, saying, "Thanks, Bob. Such wise words and a sense of hope and kindness behind what you say." So thank you so much, Tamara. That's lovely. Good stuff.
How do I get you 100 followers?
Yeah, well, hopefully tonight we might add. We actually got to find out how we actually can put followers on our Facebook page because I can't work out. There's no follower button anyway. But anyway, back to the some quick more questions. Bob, ghosts, are they real or not real?
No, they're not real.
Not real? Okay.
No.
Are you a sweet man or a savoury man?
Sweet man. My wife's a savoury person. To my shame, love sweets and eat too much sweet food.
Is there a word that you find really hard to pronounce?
Most of them these days, after my face was rebuilt.
That sounds like a setup. Man. I apologize.
Anything beginning with P or F, I have trouble pronouncing. I've got to do this. I don't know if you can see it. I've got to hold my two lips together, and I could say F and tell people to F off, and I could pronounce F and P if I hold my lips together like that. If I let them go, I say I can't say F or P.
Well,
Or
mate,
P doesn't come out, and I can't drink soup.
for what you've gone through, Bob, you are an extraordinary man, and we are more than privileged to have had you share your life, your stories, your beliefs, everything. It's just been extraordinary. I just want to ask you one question before we wrap up. When I was a young man driving around a courier van, listening to this man on the radio, you called yourself Bob Maumill. How come it changed to Bob Maumill?
It was always Bob Maumill. That was just a lazy way of saying it, but it's always been Bob Maumill. And although my mother never called me Bob, she always called me Robert. She said, Bob makes you sound like a bloody sheepdog. She said, your name, I was named after my two grandfathers, Walter and Robert, Walter Maumill and Robert Smith. So I became Walter Robert. And because there were so many Walter Maumills around, I was always called by my middle name. It was always Robert, and I don't know, it became Bob. That happened when I got into the media because people in the advertising department were too lazy to write Robert, so they shortened it to 3 letters.
To Bob. So, mate, if there's one moment, one interview, one thing that's the only thing you could tell people of the world about yourself, what would it be? The best interview, the best moment, the best whatever.
The best moment was meeting my present wife, Sabrina. She is 19 years younger than me, and she has saved my life more than once. I will be eternally grateful to her, and I wouldn't be talking to you at the moment without her patience and expertise. But that's the most extraordinary moment in my life. I was a very poor husband and father the first time round. I always like to think I was smart enough to learn from my mistakes. And at the age of 44, when I met my soulmate, Sabrina, I was a more balanced man and a better man, and someone who tried to change from a knockabout, philandering, transient idiot into at least a semi-balanced human being that treated others the way in which he would want to be treated. And it took me 44 years to grow up. Wow. And I think I grew up the day I met Sabrina. So if you asked me if there is a moment that changed my life, I'd say that was it.
What breaks your heart, Bob?
And the other moment that changed my life was when I was training a few race horses, and a race caller called Barry Thomas said to me, "Hey, Bobby, you got the gift of the gab. Have you ever been into a radio studio?" I said, "No." And he said, "What about coming out to 6IX on Saturday morning? We'll pay you $10 and give you a taxi voucher, and you just come and talk about your racehorses." That was the beginning. That was in the early 70s. It was the beginning of my radio career, and I've been doing it ever since.
That's something else we got in common too. I spent years at 6IX. So finally, Bobby, last question: what breaks your heart?
Oh, the destruction of our environment and the extinction of our species. That breaks my heart. And if I can add something else, when I started to write Letters from a Hard Country, and I read about the great engineering feats of C.Y. O'Connor and the development of the state and the bravery of the prospectors and explorers, I also learned and got to know the privations and genocide that occurred of the Aboriginal people, the suppression of their language, the fact that they had no rights, that their country was taken over and they were reduced to nothing more than just another oddity on the landscape, like one of our marsupials. And I suppose I had an epiphany when I dug into some of the records and learned what they went through. And I think my life changed then during the writing of the book, and that was when I was 80 years old.
Wow.
I went to Kalgoorlie because I wanted to have a ring of authenticity about the book, and I spoke to Aboriginal people there and their representative organisation, and it was an eye-opener for me. My final word on this will be, if you want to know how bad we can be as human beings, and if you want to know why some of our Aboriginal Australians carry a chip on their shoulder because their story had never been heard, that the narrative was dominated by the view of the latecomers to the country, like the colonists, read about the Bendu, Bendhu, Bendu atrocity. Google it, read the court transcript of it, and your view on many things, particularly the evil on which we're capable of, will be reinforced.
I will. Bobby, I grew up in Broome, Doodlakine, Pinjarra, Dampier, heavily populated Aboriginal towns. And all my life, I've fought for the rights of Aboriginal people. You've touched a real part of my heart. My son-in-law is Aboriginal. We have Aboriginal friends. I will look at that and I will check it out.
Peter,
and it absolutely breaks my heart what has happened to these beautiful people. It is something I fight against and get angry about often.
Well, they will admit that in their midst are good and bad people. But the way in which we have treated them, I've tried to bring to the notice of the public in my book. I researched it heavily. And during it all, and if I may, Peter, if I can just touch on one more thing.
Mate, you take as long as you like. Go for it. We're not going anywhere. Well, I'm not.
When I was researching the book and I discovered, and for the first time, the details of the Bendu atrocity, and the way in which people who had flogged to death Aboriginal children with a knotted rope, and they were dragged before the court in Perth, and the Chief Justice Onslow sat, and at the end of the proceedings, of the prosecution proceedings, they were found guilty of manslaughter, not of murder, and it was dead set murder, make no mistake. It was murder in the most horrible way. These two young men, one of who died in prenatal prison from typhoid, the other one was found not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter. And Chief Justice Onslow, a member of the elites in Perth, and one would expect to be a supporter of the conservative elements in the community, and certainly would not have a sympathetic view towards the Aboriginal people who were the victims in this. He was outraged that a white jury of supposedly fair-minded men could find the man in the dock and his brother who died not guilty of murder but of manslaughter. And he harangued the jury. He said you could find no other verdict than guilty of murder, yet you debased yourself by finding them guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter. I cannot sentence them to be hanged. That sentence is not provided for in the range of sentences that apply to manslaughter. But I can give them the maximum sentence, or him, the maximum sentence of life in prison. The public was astonished that the Chief Justice would in this way try and correct a wrong and would harangue the jury in that way, but he did it. And I thought, what a bloke. And I learned a lot more about him. And as in the case of Archbishop Charles Owen Lever Riley, I discovered that human beings are the sum of many things. An arch-conservative can have a soft heart. A foaming at the mouth left-winger can be the cruelest of people if the circumstances require it. We are the sum of many things and we are changeable in our views. But what took over in the minds of the Chief Justice when he applied the sentence was his core of goodness. He saw in his court a wrong that was occurring and at cost to himself because it put him at odds with the most influential people in the colony. He corrected the wrong that he saw. Now, there is a footnote to this. He sentenced the defendant, who was convicted not of murder but of manslaughter for committing an outrageous atrocity. He sentenced him to life in prison, but the government of the day, 6 years later, quietly released the murderer from prison.
Asked you for a final story, Bob. I didn't expect that. That is, wow, that is extraordinary, mate. Thank you so much for giving so much of your time. It's getting late. I reckon you can
I'm usually in bed at 7 o'clock.
Mate, you have done incredibly well. For those people who haven't read the book or haven't heard of the book, wherever you are in the world, this is a global read. This is not just for people. He's got the Letters from a Hard Country by Mr. Bob Maumill. You can get it at bobsbooks.com.au. Bob, I went to ask you earlier, is there any way of getting your book into the bigger sellers, the Dimmicks, etc.?
Not really. They're not, I self-published, which flies in the face of what they're all about. Pardon me. Those people who live in Perth who want to buy the book, if they go to Planet Books, they've got it. It's in the chief librarian at the Parliamentary Library of WA. I was asked to speak to a group of retired politicians there. I was invited by former Senator Noel Crichton-Brown. Now there, talk about people who you judge as being one thing and find out they're another. Noel said, I'd love to have you come up and talk to this group of retired politicians in a special room. And I did. And afterwards, the chief librarian bought the book, and it's in the Parliamentary Library. It's also in the National Library of Australia and the State Library of WA. And I'm sure anyone that wants to buy the book, if they speak to their local library, they'll get a copy in for them.
Mate, I have listened to you and admired you for a long, long time. Tonight, it's been a new Bob Maumill to me. The passionate man, the loving man, the caring man. There's so many dimensions. I never quite knew what it was that attracted me so much to your character and your personality as a radio presenter. But Bob, tonight, mate, I'm blown away, so much so that my wife has not once ever sat with me during one of these podcasts, but she is here hanging off my shoulder.
Can I say something?
You may say.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lou. Hi, if you're watching, I'm Lou.
I'm your biggest fan, Louise.
I'm yours, Bobby. So
As,
Bob and I
as you well know.
Oh, bless you, mate. Bobby and I had the privilege of working together. And as I said earlier, I think absolutely bar none, the best talkback radio presenter ever in Perth, Western Australia. And I don't want to dumb it down to what you do, Bob, but can I say one of the reasons why is just that you take your time. You're not trying to rush. You're not trying to make people respond and do stuff. It's just so calming in this really fast-paced world. But the reason I popped in was enjoyed the whole conversation, just wanted to say what a refreshing perspective.
Well, we've muted.
Well,
Go on.
He does that to me often.
I'm
not even doing that.
I have to apologise because I don't speak as well as I used to. As you know, I've had a few challenges, and I'm now 86. I should have been dead years ago. I told him my wife refuses to let me take my last breath. She keeps kicking me back into life. But I don't speak as well as I used to, but as you get older, you become more reflective. Now, you've said some nice things about me. I hope you'll forgive me for saying nice things about you and the people I've shared the evening with. Peter has taken on a wonderful challenge. Bringing something like this to YouTube, it's in its infancy. It's a kernel that I hope someday will grow into a wonderful tree that spreads. He's doing us a wonderful service. I mean, these things just don't happen. It takes a prime mover, and Peter's dedication has allowed us to exchange views that I hope will positively influence other people and get them thinking about it. So, and to his guests who were wonderfully, not complimentary, but accommodating of my problems and propensity to talk too long. I thank them. They've been absolutely wonderful. And Louise, pardon me, I don't think there's anyone in the universe who is better qualified emotionally and has the ability to hold the job you presently hold at the RSPCA. The way in which you keep the plight of our four-legged friends before the public is absolutely wonderful. And I have great admiration for you and your husband, and of course the guests that I've shared the evening with. And I want to thank you and apologise once again for not being the man I used to be, but I can tell you I'm a better one.
I'll tell you what, mate, in spite of what you've been through for 86, I thought you're doing all right for 81. To be 86, mate, your brain is as sharp as it's always been. And thank you for making me cry for the first time on this on this podcast. Mate, thank you so much. It's been just a memorable night that I will never forget.
Loved it. Great.
Mate, well, we'll do it again sometime, mate.
Yeah, great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Good on you, Bob.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night, mate. Take care. Love to Sabrina. He's
Yeah. Well, she's gone to bed.
yeah. All right. Wow. Letters from a Hard Country is the book. If you want to get hold of a copy, Bob's books, contact us here. Oh, Bob's come back on, so we'll wrap it up. We'll close down. Bob, if you stick around for a sec, we can have a quick chat. Jace and Rich, thank you so much. I know you didn't have an awful lot to say. There wasn't I knew it wouldn't be. When you got someone like Bob, it's just best to listen, and I just need to facilitate the questions. But
amazing conversation, amazing.
Oh, gosh. I think he has gone. He shut him down. Oh, he doesn't know how to do it, Rich.
That's all right.
That's all good. We have an image indelibly stamped on our hearts forever.
Yes.
Thanks to everyone who participated. Greg, obviously Lou and Tamara. It was extraordinary. It was a privilege, as I thought it would be. Such a fascinating insight into many different facets and stuff that we don't necessarily talk about, but it always I'm amazed at the way it was always drawn back to the character of Christ and how much it meant to him, apart from being the representative of God on earth, but enthralled with the person and the message of Jesus. So how am I going to find a guest next week to top that? Just like, good luck with that. Thanks, guys. Fabulous. Let's do it again next Wednesday. That will be the 17th of July, just after 8 o'clock. Thanks, everyone. Again, you can view this whole podcast, of course, on YouTube, and it will be on Facebook as well. Sometime, I don't know, how long does it take after the podcast? Rich, any idea?
A day or two, it'll be up there.
Yep, cool. Excellent. Thanks, guys. Take care. Cheers. See ya. Oh.
Oh, they're all gone.